This is the story of a jealous, a hidden crime, and two best friends who lost their lives too soon. Before we dive into this shocking story, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our videos. If you're already subscribed, thank you so much for your support. It means the world to us. Let's get started. Early morning on May 26, 2018. A staff member at a boarding school dormitory found the body of 17-year-old Sherelle Hogg hanging in the stairwell of the girls' residence. Minutes later, authorities discovered her best friend, Marna Engelbrecht, also dead. At first, it looked like a tragic double suicide, but small inconsistencies in the scene made investigators suspicious. What seemed like a heartbreaking loss soon turned into a complex mystery filled with secrets, tension, and threats. What do you think? Was it really suicide, or was it murder? Who wanted these two girls dead? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and stay with us to find out the shocking truth. Sherelle Hogg lived on a farm in Delville, a small town in South Africa's northwest province. She stayed with her father, Ronnie, her stepmother, Anna, and Anna's son, Eston, who she saw as her brother. Her parents divorced when she was young, but stayed friendly. Her father raised cattle, and her mother, Sonia, worked at a nearby tourist lodge. Before joining Stella boarding school, Sherelle split her time 3 weeks with her father's family and 1 week with her mother. After starting school, Sherelle began visiting her mother less often. Around this time, she unexpectedly reconnected with her childhood friend, Marna Engelbrecht. The two had been close since kindergarten, but grew apart after Sherelle moved away. Stella boarding school brought them back together. Marna's mother, Rionette, had even played music at Sherelle's parents' wedding. Both families lived in South Africa's northwest province, a rural region of savannas and farmlands. Most residents, including the Hogg and Engelbrecht families, were farmers descended from 17th century European settlers. Though their traditional way of life had faded over time, their shared heritage kept them tied to the land and each other. 8 years after drifting apart, Sherelle and Marna reunited as classmates in 8th grade at Stella. For Sherelle, the boarding school far from her farm meant trading family life for independence. Their friendship reignited quickly, but little did they know this reunion would soon spiral into tragedy. With her father busy managing the farm, and her mother living far away, Sherelle's parents were no longer a daily presence in her life. At boarding school, her friendship with Marna became her main source of comfort. In March 2017, Sherelle met Xander, an 18-year-old graduate from her school. He stood out with his athletic build, dark hair, and green eyes. Though he'd already graduated, Xander often visited areas near the school. His family life was complicated. His parents, Monty and Mercia, divorced when he was young. He lived on his father's farm 50 miles from Stella, but occasionally saw his mother, whom he was less close to, before Xander entered her life. Sherelle spent her days with Marna. The two bonded over their love for animals and horseback riding. Sherelle also dreamed of becoming a photographer, though her father believed she could model. Marna, a quiet but bright student, excelled in math and science and wanted to be a veterinarian. She lived near the town of Rieberg with her parent Stefan, a respected drilling specialist who called her Marna Thinker for her thoughtful nature, and her mother Rionette, a caregiver. Marna's older sister, Ryan, was a key part of their close-knit family. The girls shared a dorm room and spent most weekends together, sometimes staying at each other's homes. Sherelle's father treated Marna like his own daughter, and both families got along well. But beneath their happy, stable lives, trouble brewed. Xander, despite his confident exterior, carried a troubled past. His parents' divorce and strict upbringing shaped him. His father, Monty, a former police officer, raised him with tough discipline, teaching him hunting and outdoor skills. Xander excelled at rugby but had a hot temper, leading to fights with classmates and teachers. His mother struggled to conceive him, was overly protective, always defending his behavior as expressing his individuality. After graduating, Xander chose not to continue his education and began working on his father's farm. He kept a low profile on social media, rarely posting mostly photos of firearms and hunting trophies, which highlighted his hobbies. Though he lived privately, his charm and looks attracted attention, especially from young women. It was at a school event that Sherelle first noticed Xander. Alumni, including him, had been invited to meet current students. Their first interaction was brief, but mutual attraction quickly led them to spend more time together. Sherelle then, a high school senior, was drawn to his confidence, athletic build, and charm. Their relationship moved fast. In the first few weeks, Xander showered Sherelle with attention, doing everything to make her happy. He seemed caring and devoted. When it came time to meet her family, Xander was determined to impress. The meeting with Ronnie, Sherelle's father, went surprisingly well. Though cautious at first, Ronnie warmed to Xander after bonding over their shared interest in farming. Xander even offered to help with farm work, a gesture that won Ronnie over. These moments marked the beginning of their story. But beneath the surface, darker truths lurked. However, beneath the surface harmony, Xander's personality hinted at trouble ahead. His fiery temper and refusal to compromise had caused problems before, and it was only a matter of time before these traits affected his relationship with Sherelle. Mana was the first to notice the shift in her friend. The once inseparable Sherelle began avoiding her, growing distant and quiet. At first, the changes were small, but month by month, they became impossible to ignore. Sherelle made excuses to skip meetups with Mana and their friends, blaming busy schedules or exhaustion. Mana sensed Xander was behind the sudden distance. She gently asked Sherelle what was wrong, but the answers never came. However, Sherelle insisted everything was fine. The changes began after Xander fully joined her social circle. At first, his control seemed harmless. He'd ask who she was, with all what she was doing, which Sherelle saw as caring. Slowly, he demanded access to her phone, social media, and messages. Sherelle agreed, believing his jealousy meant he truly loved her. The breaking point came during prom preparations. Sherelle and her mother went shopping for a dress. A moment meant for joy turned sour when Xander interfered. He insisted on approving her dress choice, demanded minimal makeup, and even dictated how she styled her hair. To avoid conflict, Sherelle obeyed. She later confided in a few friends about feeling uneasy, but didn't realize how serious it was. Xander's control grew worse. He began isolating her from friends, openly disliking anyone he called a bad influence. If Sherelle spent time with others, he demanded every detail. To avoid fights, she withdrew socially, even from Mana, her closest friend. Mana tried to warn Sherelle, telling her Xander's behavior was wrong. However, Sherelle reassured herself and everyone else that these were just temporary issues caused by Xander's personality. She believed he'd change, but instead, his control tightened and his behavior turned aggressive. Even during family dinners with his relatives, Sherelle felt Xander watching her every word and move. Over time, they noticed her fading confidence. She grew quiet, retreating into herself. They blamed school stress, unaware of the truth. Only Mana saw the danger and kept trying to reach her friend. January 2018, Sherelle Hogg had reached her breaking point. Xander's grip on her life had tightened into something, suffocating his once charming demeanor, warped by possessiveness and rage. What began as subtle control, constant check-ins, veiled jealousy, had spiraled into blatant aggression, scrutinized her every move. Texts dissected, social media stalked, friendships policed, arguments erupted like storms, his temper flaring into physical intimidation. After one clash, faint bruises lingered on Sherelle's arms, sparking urgent concern in Mana, her sharp-eyed best friend, for months. Sherelle's family and friends watched helplessly as Xander's dominance poisoned her world. But the marks were the tipping point. Mana pleaded with her to act. Finally, Sherelle mustered the courage to cut tease a decision that would unravel a chilling escalation no one saw coming. After Sherelle ended the relationship, Xander reacted violently. He sent her endless messages, threatening to hurt himself, saying he couldn't live without her. He tried to guilt-trip her, begging her to come back. But Sherelle stayed strong. She ignored his threats and refused to change her mind. Sherelle was done with the bad relationship for good. Around this time, Mana, Sherelle's best friend, got caught up in the fight. Xander blamed Mana for changing Sherelle's mind and started sending her mean, scary texts. Worried, Mana told her dad, Stefan, what was happening. Stefan stepped in right away. He called Xander and ordered him to stop the bullying. This calmed things down for a while, but Xander's anger didn't go away completely. A few months after Sherelle broke up with Xander, she started spending more time with Brandon Victor, an old friend she'd known since she was 14. Brandon was a kind, popular high school senior who was great at sports. He helped Sherelle feel better by listening to her and supporting her through the stress Xander was still causing. Over time, they grew closer and started dating, but they kept it quiet. They didn't want Xander to find out, because he was still dangerously obsessed with Sherelle. Xander refused to accept Sherelle's choice to move forward. He pursued her relentlessly, appearing without warning in spaces she often visited, and bombarded her with texts. His actions left Sherelle and Brandon on edge. They steered clear of crowded areas where Xander might lurk, maintaining a low-profile relationship to prevent further conflict. By May 2018, the strain reached a critical juncture. Despite Sherelle's attempts to rebuild her calm, unceasing meddling weighed heavily on her. His denial of their breakup and relentless efforts to insert himself into her world fueled a charged, unstable environment for her and everyone around her. Addressing this turmoil demanded drastic measures, but as tensions escalated, the clock ticked louder. Dawn broke on May 26, 2018, cloaking the boarding school dormitory in an unnerving quiet. Christelle, a staff member, started her rounds at 6 a.m., moving through silent corridors to rouse students. Near the restroom entrance, her gaze dropped to the tiles. Clumps of dark hair littered the floor. She brushed it off as remnants. A student's morning routine, nothing worth a second thought. However, as Christelle neared the staircase descending to the ground floor, her eyes locked onto a taut green nylon rope secured across the railing. Seconds later, she stood motionless, her breath catching at the sight of white-socked feet suspended mid-air. Just hours before, around 4:17 a.m., Sonia, Sherelle's mother, woke in her series home to a disturbing message from her daughter. "Mum, I just wanted to say, I love you and I'm sorry." The misspelled sorry jolted Sonia. Sherelle never made such errors. Panicked, she dialed her daughter's number, but it rang out. Frantic, she contacted her ex-husband, Ronnie, who'd been asleep. He assured Sonia all seemed normal prior evening, but agreed to check his phone. Scrolling through Sherelle's overnight texts, 2 messages chilled him. The first, sent at 3:42 a.m., contained a photo of Sherelle in lingerie with the caption, "I love you, Brandon." The second message, time-stamped for 17 a.m., read, "Dad, I'm sorry. Mana and I are leaving." The vague, alarming tone of these texts filled Ronnie with dread for their well-being. He urgently alerted the school's principal, Richard Hobson, voicing his fears. Meanwhile, Christelle, still reeling from her chilling discovery, hurried upstairs to Sherelle and Mana's room. It stood vacant. The girls' belongings lay orderly, as if prepped for a routine morning. No signs of chaos. No clues. Christelle's stomach dropped. This wasn't carelessness. It was calculated. She rushed back to the stairwell, her pulse racing. Simultaneously, panic rippled through Sherelle's circle. Brandon, her boyfriend, had also received a baffling late-night text. Her words felt off. When his calls went unanswered, a gnawing dread took hold. Though unclear on the details, he knew something was wrong. What was meant to be a morning buzzing with energy for a rugby match swiftly spiraled into turmoil. Whispers of a grim event rippled through the student body. By the time Ronnie and Sonia reached the boarding school, frantic for answers, the air crackled with dread and confusion. On the morning of May 26, 2018, Richard Hobson, the school's headmaster, received a harrowing call from Christelle, a dorm supervisor. Her voice trembled as she described stumbling upon Sherelle Hogg's lifeless body hanging from the stairwell railing. Hobson pressed for details, but the line went dead. Christelle had dropped the phone, sprinting for help. Meanwhile, Ronnie learned of the horror through a terse call from the principal. Both Sherelle and Mana were dead. Consumed by grief and frantic for clarity, Ronnie enlisted his brother Lewis to drive him to the school. During the agonizing ride, he replayed Sherelle's eerie final messages, grasping for meaning in the senseless tragedy at the school. Hobson and staff rushed to shield students from the gruesome sight. When police arrived that morning, they uncovered 2 bodies. Sherelle's, suspended from the stairwell railing, and Mana's, lifeless in a first-floor bathroom with a backpack strap knotted around her neck. Initial police theories of a double suicide began to unravel. Investigators noted the neck marks on both girls didn't match typical signs of suicide, sparking suspicions of foul play. As officers scoured the scene, Ronnie barged into the building, desperate to reach his daughter's body. Police warned him not to disturb the evidence, but grief drowned their orders. Only with Lewis's intervention was Sherelle finally lowered. Nearby, Mana's father Stefan erupted in rage upon seeing his daughter. This wasn't suicide, he shouted, pointing blame at Xander, Sherelle's ex-boyfriend. He did this. Amid the turmoil, one question loomed: what really happened that night? At the school, Principal Hobson enlisted private investigator Chris Sanders, a seasoned professional he'd collaborated with previously. Sanders arrived swiftly, launching his inquiry. One of his first interviews was with Brandon Victor, Sherelle's boyfriend. Brandon disclosed receiving cryptic messages from her that night, their meaning unclear. He also revealed Xander's dangerous fixation on Sherelle, including threats post-breakup. Investigators amassed evidence hinting at a third party's role. The nylon rope from the staircase and Mana's backpack strap were scrutinized for fingerprint ski clues to reconstruct the tragedy. Xander's name surfaced repeatedly in student accounts, cementing him as Sanders' prime suspect. Meanwhile, Stefan, Marna's father, grew frustrated with the sluggish investigation. Defying protocol, he stormed to Xander's home, demanding answers, a reckless move that risked derailing the case. Sherelle, Marna, and Brandon huddled in the girls' dorm. Brandon had sneaked in, defying school rules, to comfort Sherelle, rattled by Xander's menacing messages. They sipped coffee, but Sherelle's anxiety deepened as hours passed. At 1 a.m., Xander called. Sherelle put him on speaker. Initially calm, he begged her to meet outside. When she refused, his voice turned venomous. Threats erupted before he snarled. "You'll regret what I do tonight." Sherelle trembled. Brandon offered to stay, but she urged him to leave, terrified he'd be caught. By 2 a.m., the dorm fell silent, silence that would soon shatter. Brandon left, unknowingly, parting ways with the girls for the last time. On the morning of May 26th, after learning of Sherelle and Marna's deaths, Marna's father, Stefan, marched to Xander's home. Grief-stricken and furious, he confronted Xander and his father, Monty, at their farm, accusing Xander of involvement. The clash intensified into a shouting match until private investigator Chris Sanders arrived. With steady composure, Sanders diffused the tension, urging Stefan to stand down and convincing Xander to accompany him to the police station. During the drive, Sanders methodically interrogated Xander, whose resolve eventually shattered. He confessed to murdering Sherelle out of jealousy and killing Marna to erase any witnesses. Sanders documented the admission on a voice recorder. The crime scene, police gathered evidence. The girls' injuries and the stage setting suggested homicide, a theory corroborated by Xander's confession. During formal questioning, Xander admitted to planning the murders meticulously, disguising them as suicides. He detailed sneaking into the dorm and executing his scheme. Investigators later uncovered disturbing proof of his obsession: texts, photos, and journal entries flooding his phone. Xander's trial centered on his motives and actions. A pivotal moment came from Anastasia Fesser, a fishing competition acquaintance. She testified about a call from Xander the day before the murders, where he raged, "I won't let Sherelle live without me." His vow to make her life unbearable now rang as a harrowing prelude to tragedy. Anastasia admitted dismissing his words as a heated rant, unaware of the looming horror. However, looking back, Anastasia deeply regretted not alerting authorities or warning Sherelle and Marna's loved ones. Her testimony became a pivotal element of the trial, revealing Xander's dangerous fixation and the calculated intent behind his crimes. During the trial, Brandon, Victor Sherelle's boyfriend, critical testimony. He recounted how, on the evening of May 24, 2018, he'd secretly entered the girls' dormitory to comfort Sherelle and Marna. They chatted, laughed, and tried to ease the suffocating tension hanging over them, a desperate attempt to lift spirits before the harrowing chain of events unfolded. However, their night was disrupted by a call from Xander. Sherelle switched the phone to speaker, letting Brandon and Marna eavesdrop. Initially, Xander's tone was measured, almost coaxing. He pleaded for her to meet him. When she refused, his voice twisted into a snarl, lashing out with an ominous threat. "You'll regret this." After the call, Sherelle's hands shook, but she urged Brandon to slip back to the boys' dormitory, fearing repercussions if caught. That goodbye became their final moment together. The next morning, police uncovered their bodies, igniting the investigation that would corner Xander. At trial, his defense team scrambled to undermine the evidence, alleging his confession had been wrung from him under duress. The court proved Xander's team was lying because there was too much proof. Private investigator Xander's testimony, paired with audio recordings of Xander's cold, unscripted confessions, left little room for doubt. Forensic experts showed Xander was a dangerous person, a volatile young man consumed by a dangerous obsession with Cherelle, his toxic jealousy, suffocating need for control, and spiraling rage after their breakup were pinpointed as the catalysts for the murders. Xander's family dynamics further fueled scrutiny. His mother, Mercer, had coddled and excused his behavior since childhood, initially denied any wrongdoing, dismissing his actions as misunderstood passion. In stark contrast, his father, Monty, a retired police officer, publicly condemned his son, stating, "There's no justifying this. He must face the consequences." Xander was sentenced to 2 life terms, but for Cherelle and Marna's families, closure remained fragile. Monty, once vocal about his son's guilt, later reversed course, calling the verdict unjust and launching. Yet amid the legal battles, one truth endured: 2 inseparable friends, bound in life, now rested together in death. This tragedy forces us to confront hidden dangers in relationships, the obsessions we miss, the threats we dismiss. It asks painful questions. How does upbringing shape a killer? Could emotional scars, left unhealed, doom someone to violence? Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, help us share it. Like, comment, and subscribe to bring light to the darkest cases. Together, we honor victims and demand justice. Until next time, stay aware and stay safe.